Rainwater runs down the yellow curb outside Incheon International Airport, collecting in shallow ripples beneath the fluorescent glow of the arrival canopy. Hana Seo stops walking. The wheels of her small suitcase roll half a meter more before the handle slips in her grip. The case tilts, the plastic wheels grinding against wet pavement. She doesn't look back immediately. Taxi engines idle. A sliding terminal door hisses open. Cold night air carries the sharp smell of jet fuel and damp asphalt. Behind her someone says her name. Hana. The voice is calm. Close enough that the rain cannot hide it. Her shoulders stiffen. The movement pulls the gray wool coat tighter across her stomach. The fabric stretches slightly where it wasn't meant to. A quiet reminder she has been trying not to think about since the taxi dropped her at Terminal 2. She closes her eyes once, then turns. Kong Min-jae stands several meters away under the airport canopy. Black suit. White shirt collar slightly open. Dark hair damp from the rain that blew sideways across the drop-off lane. Headlights from passing taxis slide across the pavement behind him, turning the wet ground into streaks of silver. He isn't rushing. He isn't angry. He simply watches her. The distance between them feels carefully chosen. Close enough that she cannot pretend he's mistaken. Far enough that the people walking past with luggage carts don't notice the stillness locked between them. Hana's fingers tighten around the suitcase handle. "You shouldn't be here," she says. Her voice barely carries past the rain. Min-jae tilts his head slightly, as if measuring the words rather than reacting to them. "You chose a busy airport," he says. "I expected somewhere quieter." A shuttle bus pulls up at the curb behind Hana. Its brakes sigh loudly, releasing a cloud of warm air that drifts across the pavement. Travelers spill out with backpacks and rolling luggage, their voices rising briefly before dissolving into the hum of the terminal. None of them slow down. Hana glances toward the sliding glass doors. Above them, the departure board flickers between destinations. Vancouver. Boarding soon. The letters glow pale blue through the rain. Her passport sits in the inside pocket of her coat. A different name printed beside her photograph. A life she spent weeks assembling piece by piece. She adjusts her grip on the suitcase. Min-jae notices the movement. His eyes drop briefly to the bag, then rise again. "You packed light," he says. The statement lands without accusation. Hana doesn't answer. Wind pushes another sheet of rain beneath the canopy. Droplets strike the pavement between them with a steady tapping sound. Min-jae takes one step forward. Not fast. Just enough to close the distance slightly. Hana feels it in her chest before she measures it with her eyes. "Don't," she says. The word comes out sharper than she intended. Min-jae stops. A taxi passes behind him, its headlights sliding across his face for a moment before fading into the line of traffic leaving the terminal. For a few seconds neither of them moves. Then his gaze shifts. Downward. Hana follows it instinctively. His eyes rest on the curve beneath her coat. The silence that follows stretches long enough that the rain becomes louder than the airport. Min-jae inhales slowly. When he speaks again his voice is lower. "How far along?" Hana's throat tightens. She hadn't planned to answer that question tonight. She hadn't planned to hear it from him at all. "It's not 3 months. The words interrupt her before the sentence forms. Min-jae's eyes lift again, steady. "Maybe a little more," he adds quietly. Hana stares at him. The cold air beneath the canopy presses against the back of her neck. "You've been watching me." The statement leaves her mouth before she can stop it. Min-jae doesn't deny it. A line of taxis pulls forward along the curb, engines rumbling softly. Drivers lean out their windows calling destinations to travelers who hesitate in the rain. Hana hears none of it clearly. Her pulse beats against the inside of her wrists. "You followed me here," she says. Min-jae shakes his head once. "No," the answer comes without hesitation. "I arrived before you." The meaning settles slowly. Her stomach tightens beneath the coat. For a moment she says nothing. Min-jae studies her face as if searching for something familiar beneath the exhaustion. You were careful, he continues. New phone. Cash transactions. Different routes leaving Busan. Pauses. But airports leave patterns. Hannah feels the ground beneath her shoes shift slightly as another aircraft taxis somewhere beyond the terminal. You had no right, she says. The rain softens briefly, turning into a mist that drifts through the lights above the curb. Min-jae's expression doesn't change. Your flight boards in 15 minutes. Hannah looks back at the glowing departure board. Vancouver. The letters flicker again. A memory presses against the back of her mind. Nights spent staring at blueprints and energy routing diagrams inside a glass office overlooking Busan Harbor. The hum of computer servers. The quiet satisfaction of solving structural equations that kept offshore turbines standing against winter storms. She pushes the thought away. Min-jae watches the movement. You didn't tell me, he says. Hannah exhales slowly. There was nothing to tell. The lie hangs between them. Min-jae steps closer again. This time only 1 meter separates them. Hannah can see the rainwater sliding from his hair onto the collar of his shirt. The faint scent of salt carried inland from the sea. His gaze drops once more toward her stomach, then returns to her face. 2 heartbeats, he says quietly. Hannah's breath catches. The airport noise rushes back all at once. Rolling luggage wheels, car horns, the murmur of distant announcements echoing through the terminal. She feels the suitcase handle slipping again in her grip. How long have you known? She asks. Min-jae does not answer immediately. A gust of wind pushes rain against the side of the terminal glass. Then he says, long enough. Hannah's chest tightens. The life she built during the last 3 months flashes briefly in her mind. Temporary apartment keys, engineering emails sent from anonymous accounts, the careful distance she kept from anyone who might recognize her. All of it collapses quietly beneath the calm certainty in Min-jae's voice. You shouldn't have come, she says again. Min-jae studies her for another long moment. Running doesn't change the ocean, he says. The sentence lands oddly between them. Hannah shakes her head. You don't understand. Min-jae's eyes darken slightly. You ran because you think you do. A boarding announcement echoes through the terminal doors. Passengers begin moving faster toward the entrance. Hannah's flight. Her hand tightens on the suitcase handle again. Min-jae follows the motion. Then he reaches inside his coat pocket. Hannah stiffens. He removes a slim metal device no larger than a phone. The screen glows faintly in the rain. Rows of numbers scroll across it. Coordinates, power loads, grid routing path. Hannah feels the breath leave her lungs. She recognizes the interface instantly. Where did you get that? She asks. Min-jae tilts the screen slightly so the light reflects across her face. From the system you helped design. The wind shifts. Rain strikes the pavement harder now. Hannah stares at the moving data. Offshore turbine clusters. Transmission corridors stretching across the Yellow Sea. Energy loads shifting through the maritime network. A red timer blinks at the bottom of the screen. 58 minutes and 42 seconds. Min-jae's voice cuts through the sound of the rain. The offshore grid started rerouting power 20 minutes ago. Hannah's pulse jumps. That shouldn't be possible. Min-jae's gaze remains steady. It is if the system locks into the maritime corridors tonight. The timer continues counting down. Hannah's fingers loosen slightly around the suitcase handle. What happens if it locks? She asks. Min-jae holds her eyes. The entire coastal grid becomes permanent. The word hangs between them. Permanent. Hannah looks again at the timer. 58 minutes left. Behind her, the airport doors slide open. Passengers begin boarding the Vancouver flight. Min-jae doesn't glance toward the terminal. He only watches her. Rainwater gathers along the edge of the curb and spills slowly into the storm drain beside Hannah's shoes. Her suitcase remains where it tilted. The boarding call echoes once more through the speakers. Min-jae lowers the device slightly. You designed the override protocols, he says. Hannah feels the weight of the words settle into her chest. The timer continues blinking. 57 minutes and 31 seconds. Min Jae's voice drops almost to a whisper. If the system locks tonight. His eyes flick once toward her stomach. Our children grow up inside it. The rain grows heavier. And the timer keeps counting down. The rain grows heavier. And the timer keeps counting down. 57 minutes and 28 seconds. The red digits pulse against the dark screen in Kong Min Jae's hand. Each second flickers away like a quiet warning. Hannah Seo stares at it without blinking. The numbers feel louder than the airport. Water drips from the edge of the canopy and lands beside her suitcase in steady taps. Her fingers slide slowly off the handle. The suitcase tips completely and falls onto its side with a dull plastic knock. Neither of them looks down at it. Another second disappears. 57 minutes and 26 seconds. A gust of wind blows rain sideways across the drop-off lane. Taxi headlights smear white lines across the wet pavement. Somewhere behind Hannah, the terminal speaker repeats the boarding call for Vancouver. Passengers hurry through the sliding doors, shoulders hunched under umbrellas. The world keeps moving. Timer does not slow. Hannah's eyes lift from the screen to Min Jae's face. You're lying. The words scrape out quietly. Min Jae doesn't react. He turns the device slightly so the glow falls across her coat and the curve beneath it. Numbers continue crawling across the display. Grid loads shifting through offshore turbines, corridors lighting up along the maritime network. You built the architecture, he says. You know what the rerouting means. Hannah's jaw tightens. The rain trickling down the side of her neck feels colder now. The offshore grid can't lock itself. It didn't. Min Jae's thumb taps the edge of the screen. Second display opens. Ownership signatures. Authorization keys. Corporate seals Hannah recognizes instantly from the Energy Consortium offices overlooking Busan Harbor. The same signatures stamped every construction contract for the offshore wind platform. Her stomach twists. Those are internal authorizations. Min Jae watches her. Yes. Silence drops between them. Rain hits the pavement harder. The red digits slide to 56 minutes and 51 seconds. Hannah reaches toward the screen without realizing it. Her hand stops halfway. The cold air presses against her palm. She knows the pattern on the interface. She wrote half the code that organizes those energy corridors. Yet one line blinking near the bottom doesn't belong. A routing command threading through maritime shipping lanes instead of civilian infrastructure. She whispers almost to herself. Those routes aren't part of the grid. Min Jae's gaze sharpens. They are now. A truck rumbles past the curb. The vibration travels through the pavement into Hannah's shoes. She pulls her hand back slowly. You changed the system. Min Jae shakes his head once. Not me. The statement hangs there. The rain softens for a moment, leaving only the distant roar of aircraft engines somewhere beyond the terminal. Hannah studies the scrolling coordinates again. Several transmission hubs are lighting up across the Yellow Sea. Points that align not with energy substations but with shipping routes used by offshore cargo fleets. Fleets she has seen before in port manifests. Fleets that never officially exist. Her breathing becomes shallow. Those corridors belong to maritime contractors. Min Jae does not answer. Hannah lifts her head. Illegal ones. Another second disappears. 56 minutes and 7 seconds. The timer keeps shrinking. Min Jae slides the device back into his coat pocket. The red glow vanishes, but the pressure remains in the air between them. Once the lock finalizes, he says quietly, the energy grid routes through those fleets permanently. Hannah hears the words like distant thunder. That would turn every offshore turbine into a controlled switch. Yes. Rainwater trickles down the back of her wrist. She rubs it against her coat absently. The idea unfolds in her mind with terrifying clarity. Whoever controls those maritime corridors controls the coastal electricity supply. Entire cities depending on power lines that now run through criminal shipping networks. Hospitals, ports, residential towers stretching across Busan and the southern coast. Her siblings working maintenance rotations on turbine rigs far out in the dark sea. Hannah takes a step backward without realizing it. Her heel bumps the fallen suitcase. The plastic wheel spins once and stops. You knew about this. Min-jae watches the movement carefully. Not at first. The answer arrives too quickly to be casual. Hannah studies his face. The rain has flattened his hair against his forehead. He hasn't tried to wipe the water away. Then why are you here, she asks. Min-jae glances briefly toward the glowing airport entrance behind her. Passengers are disappearing through the sliding doors. Boarding almost finished. Because you can still stop it. Hannah lets out a dry breath. No, the word is immediate. The override protocols require consortium access. A dozen executive approvals. Min-jae shakes his head slightly. Not if the designer initiates emergency architecture control. The rain seems to pause for a heartbeat. Hannah's eyes narrow. That key was destroyed. Min-jae says nothing. Hannah studies him. Then her gaze drops to the inside pocket of his coat. The outline beneath the fabric is unmistakable. A small metal cylinder. Her breath catches. The master override key. The one she sealed into a security vault before leaving Busan 3 months earlier. That's impossible, she whispers. Min-jae reaches slowly into his coat. The movement is deliberate, giving her time to step away if she wants. She doesn't move. He pulls out the cylinder. Rain beads across the polished steel. The airport lights reflect off its surface like cold fire. Hannah stares at it. Her hands begin to tremble slightly. The vault had biometric locks, she says. Min-jae turns the key once between his fingers. Yes. Then how? He stops the motion and looks at her again. The same person who authorized the maritime corridors authorized the vault. The words fall quietly, but they hit harder than the rain. Hannah's mouth goes dry. The Coastal Energy Consortium flashes across her mind. Board meetings, contracts, investors funding the massive offshore wind platform meant to power half the southern coastline. At the center of all of it, one silent financial backer. A shipping magnate whose name never appeared publicly, only inside confidential development files. The man whose fleets already moved across every shipping lane in the Yellow Sea. Hannah's voice lowers. He owns the grid now. Min-jae's silence answers her. The airport speaker crackles again. Final boarding call for Vancouver. Hannah's head turns automatically toward the terminal doors. Only a few passengers remain outside. A gate agent stands near the entrance scanning boarding passes. The doors slide open and shut again. Rain drifts through the light. She imagines walking through those doors. Sitting on the plane. Watching the runway lights fade as the aircraft climbs above the dark sea. By morning she would be on the other side of the world. The turbines would lock into the new network behind her. Her siblings still out there on maintenance rigs. Cities waking up beneath a grid controlled by men who move cargo through midnight shipping lanes. Hannah closes her eyes briefly. When she opens them again, Min-jae is still standing there with the key in his hand, waiting. Water drips from the edge of the cylinder onto the pavement. Neither of them speaks. The silence stretches long enough that the airport sounds fade again. The traffic, the speakers, the rain. Just the two of them under the canopy. Finally Hannah exhales slowly. If I trigger the override, she says, the entire offshore platform shuts down. Min-jae nods once. Yes. Power loss across the coast. Another nod. For how long? Long enough. The words hang in the damp air. Hannah looks toward the terminal again. The gate agent is stepping back inside. Boarding is ending. Her suitcase lies on its side behind her. The life she planned sits inside it. Passport. Ticket. Clean escape. She looks back at Min-jae. If the shutdown happens, she says quietly, whoever built those corridors will know exactly who stopped them. Min-jae does not disagree. Rainwater runs down the side of his face. He still hasn't moved closer. He simply extends the small steel key toward her. The metal glints beneath the airport lights. The grid locks in 54 minutes, he says. Hannah doesn't reach for it. The wind pushes rain across the pavement again, spraying cold droplets against her coat. Somewhere beyond the runway, thunder rolls across the sea. The airport doors slide closed behind her. She is no longer boarding anything. Min-jae's hand remains outstretched. The key waits between them. And in the distance, far beyond the terminal lights, the offshore turbines continue routing power through the dark water. The metal key waits between them. Rain beads along its smooth surface, gathering at the edge before dropping to the pavement in quiet ticks. Hannah Seo doesn't move. Kong Min-jae's hand stays extended, steady, patient. Behind Hannah, the sliding doors of Incheon International Airport close again with a soft mechanical sigh. The terminal lights reflect across the wet ground like broken glass. No one else remains near the curb now. Only the distant rumble of taxis circling the terminal loop and the steady hiss of rain under the canopy. Hannah's eyes stay fixed on the key. The steel cylinder looks smaller than she remembers. Yet the weight of it presses into the air between them like a threat. "You shouldn't have brought that here," she says quietly. Min-jae's expression doesn't shift. "You're the one who hid it." The timer still glows in her mind even though the screen is gone. 54 minutes. The offshore turbines are already moving power across the Yellow Sea through corridors that never belonged to the grid. Hannah imagines the towers rising from the dark water beyond Busan Harbor, blades cutting slowly through the wind. Thousands of homes drawing electricity from those lines. Hospitals, ports, maintenance crews working through the night on distant platforms. She forces the image away. The key remains in front of her. "Take it," Min-jae says. The rain drips from the canopy edge again. Hannah finally lifts her hand. Not toward the key. Toward his wrist. She pushes his arm gently downward. No, the metal cylinder lowers with his hand. For the first time since he appeared behind her, something sharp flickers across Min-jae's face. Disappears quickly. "You built the emergency architecture," he says. "You're the only person who can stop the lock." Hannah shakes her head once. Water slides from her hairline down her cheek. That's not how the system works anymore. Min-jae watches her carefully. "You're certain?" Hannah doesn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifts past him into the rain-dark road beyond the terminal. Headlights pass through the mist and vanish again. A memory presses against her thoughts. Server rooms humming under white light. Engineers gathered around projection tables inside the consortium headquarters overlooking Busan Harbor. The day the final grid architecture changed. She breathes out slowly. "The override key only interrupts turbine routing," she says. "Not the maritime corridors." Min-jae's eyes narrow slightly. "Meaning?" Hannah looks back at him. "Meaning whoever built the shipping network designed it to survive a shutdown." The wind shifts under the canopy. Rain taps against the steel key in his hand. "If I trigger the override," she continues, "the offshore turbines stop feeding power into the grid." She pauses. "But the maritime routes remain." Min-jae studies her face. Hannah's voice lowers. "Those ships still control the transmission lines." Silence falls again. The airport speakers click faintly somewhere inside the terminal before going quiet. The last boarding call has ended. No one else is coming through those doors tonight. Min-jae glances briefly toward the dark road beyond the taxi lane. Then back at her. "You're saying the grid locks either way." Hannah nods once. "If the turbines shut down, the coast loses power." Rain trickles along the edge of the curb beside her suitcase. "If they stay running," she adds, "the shipping network owns the electricity permanently." The words settle heavily between them. Min-jae lowers his hand slightly, the key still caught between his fingers. "So there's no clean interruption." Hannah shakes her head again. The cold air presses against her lungs. "The system was designed that way." Another second disappears somewhere unseen. The timer continues its silent march toward 0. Min-jae steps closer without warning. Only half a step, but enough that Hana notices the rainwater sliding off his coat collar. Then why run, he asks. Hana stiffens slightly. The question lands harder than anything else he's said tonight. She turns her head away from him. Across the airport road, a digital billboard flickers above the parking structure. Blue light flashes across the wet asphalt. Because shutting it down destroys the coastal grid, she says quietly. And leaving it running hands control to criminals. Min-jae doesn't respond. Hana presses her lips together. The cold wind lifts the edge of her gray coat slightly before dropping it again. Either way, she says, people lose power tonight. Her hand drifts unconsciously toward her stomach. The movement is small. Min-jae notices it instantly. His jaw tightens. Hana lowers her hand again quickly. The rain grows softer for a moment, turning into a mist beneath the canopy. The world beyond the terminal feels strangely quiet now. Min-jae lifts the key again slightly. Not offering it this time. Just holding it where the light catches its edge. There's another layer, he says. Hana's eyes flick toward the metal cylinder. What layer? Min-jae studies her face for a long moment before answering. The man funding the grid. The rain thickens again. Hana's shoulders stiffen. He says nothing. Min-jae continues. He isn't just controlling the maritime corridors. Hana looks back at him slowly. I know. The words leave her mouth before she decides to speak them. Min-jae's gaze sharpens. Hana inhales slowly. The cold air tastes faintly of fuel and salt carried inland from the sea. Those shipping fleets already move through the Yellow Sea under his contracts, she says. But the grid does more than supply electricity. Min-jae tilts his head slightly. Hana meets his eyes. It supplies navigation. For a moment Min-jae doesn't move. The rain falls harder now, splashing against the pavement between them. Hana continues quietly. Every offshore turbine broadcasts positioning signals for maintenance drones and cargo vessels. Her voice lowers. If someone controls the grid, they control those signals. Understanding flickers across Min-jae's face. The sea lanes. Every vessel depending on the offshore navigation network. Merchant ships. Patrol craft. Cargo fleets moving through the straits south of Busan. Hana's fingers curl slowly. Electricity was never the real target. The silence that follows stretches wide. Rainwater runs along the curb toward the storm drain. Min-jae looks down at the key again, then back at her. And you built half the system. Hana closes her eyes briefly. The weight of the statement presses into her chest. She opens them again. I built the part meant to protect it. Another gust of wind pushes rain across the canopy. The steel key glints faintly in Min-jae's hand. Then his phone vibrates suddenly inside his coat. The sound cuts through the rain like a knife. He freezes. The vibration stops, then starts again. Min-jae pulls the phone out slowly. The screen lights up his face. Hana watches him carefully. A single message fills the display. No name attached. Just a line of text. Min-jae reads it once. His shoulders tighten slightly. Hana feels the shift instantly. What is it? She asks. He doesn't answer. The rain drums harder against the pavement now. Min-jae lowers the phone slowly. The steel key remains clutched in his other hand. When he finally speaks, his voice is quieter than before. The first turbine platform just went dark. Hana's breath catches. Dark. Min-jae nods once. Power cut. Her pulse spikes instantly. That means someone already triggered the shutdown sequence. Min-jae lifts his eyes toward her. The red glow of the timer returns briefly as he unlocks the device again. The countdown reads. 41 minutes and 9 seconds. Hana stares at it. That's impossible, she whispers. Min-jae doesn't look away from the screen. The rain pours harder around them. Another message appears beneath the first. This one longer. Min-jae reads it silently. His jaw tightens again. Hannah's voice drops to a whisper. What does it say? Min-jae slowly raises his eyes to hers. It says, he murmurs, the override key has already been used. The steel cylinder glints coldly between his fingers. And the timer keeps falling. The override key has already been used. The words hang between Hannah Seo and Kong Min-jae like a sudden drop in pressure. Rain drums against the airport canopy. Louder now, bouncing off the pavement in silver splashes. Hannah stares at the steel cylinder still resting in Min-jae's hand. It gleams under the fluorescent lights. Touch. Her breath leaves slowly. That's not possible. Min-jae doesn't respond immediately. The screen of his phone still glows faintly, reflecting across the rainwater sliding down his fingers. The message remains open. Hannah takes one step forward, her shoes scraping softly across the wet concrete. Show me. Min-jae turns the phone toward her. The text sits there plainly. Turbine platform 07 offline. Override authorization confirmed. Beneath it, a line of coordinates. Hannah's eyes scan the numbers quickly. The pattern hits her stomach like a punch. Platform 07. Her throat tightens. That maintenance rig sits far off the southern corridor of the Yellow Sea, almost exactly where her siblings are stationed this week. The rain grows heavier around them. Hannah's voice drops into a tight whisper. That's the southern cluster. Min-jae watches her face carefully. She doesn't look at him. She's already running through the system architecture in her head. The turbines connect in chains across the offshore wind field outside Busan Harbor. When one shuts down, the neighboring platforms compensate automatically. But if an override command initiated the shutdown, the redistribution algorithms behave differently. The network begins shifting power violently across the grid. Hannah lifts her head slowly. That's not a safety shutdown. Min-jae says nothing. Hannah continues, the words forming as the logic locks into place. That's a forced reroute. Another vibration trembles through Min-jae's phone. He glances down. A second notification arrives. His thumb taps the screen. Hannah watches his eyes move as he reads. The muscles along his jaw tighten. The rainwater running down his face drips from his chin to the pavement. Hannah doesn't need to ask. She already knows something worse is coming. Min-jae lifts the phone again. Platform 11 just dropped. Hannah's pulse spikes instantly. 2 turbines gone. The grid will already be compensating. Somewhere beyond the airport lights, the offshore field is shifting power like a living organism trying to survive damage. The countdown inside Min-jae's device flashes again. 38 minutes and 16 seconds. The time shrinks rapidly now. Hannah exhales slowly through her teeth. Whoever triggered the override isn't shutting the system down. Min-jae nods slightly. They're steering it. Hannah turns toward the dark sky beyond the terminal. Lightning flickers faintly far out over the sea. The storm that rolled across the southern coast earlier tonight hasn't finished moving inland. Wind turbines thrive in storms. More wind means more electricity. More electricity means more load moving through the grid. And someone out there is deliberately cutting turbines one by one. Her hand drifts unconsciously toward her stomach again. The fabric of her gray coat shifts with the movement. Min-jae notices. He lowers the steel key slightly, but he doesn't put it away. If the grid redistributes too fast, Hannah says quietly, the system overloads. Rainwater drips from the canopy and lands on her suitcase behind her. The case lies on its side where she dropped it earlier, wheels still glistening with water. How many turbines are in the southern chain? Min-jae asks. Hannah closes her eyes for a moment, seeing the layout as if she's staring at the design interface again. Towers rising from the sea. Transmission cables stretching across the ocean floor. 21. She opens her eyes again. And platform 07 and 11 are the anchors. Min-jae understands immediately. Without the anchors, the rest of the southern corridor becomes unstable. The power must travel north through the central turbines instead. Hannah breathes slowly. They're collapsing the southern field. The words land like cold iron. Min-jae studies the key again in his hand. What happens if they finish? Hannah looks back at him. Rain runs down the side of her neck. The grid routes everything through the maritime corridor. Min-jae doesn't blink. The shipping lanes. The hidden infrastructure buried beneath the energy network. Whoever commands those sea routes gains control the moment the turbines lose balance. Another message vibrates across his phone. He doesn't check it this time. Hannah hears the faint buzzing anyway. The storm wind pushes a cold sheet of rain under the canopy, spraying against her coat. She steps slightly closer to Min-jae without realizing it. How many platforms are offline now? Min-jae glances at the screen quickly. 3. Hannah's stomach tightens. 3 turbines in less than 10 minutes. The countdown ticks down again. 36 minutes and 2 seconds somewhere inside the airport. A luggage cart rattles across tile floors. The sound echoes faintly through the glass doors before disappearing again. Outside, the world feels smaller now. Just rain. The road. The empty curb lane. And the quiet war happening far out across the sea. Hannah stares at the key again. The metal cylinder looks heavier now. If I trigger the override, she says slowly, it shuts down every turbine at once. Min-jae nods once. Hannah continues. That stabilizes the grid temporarily. Her voice drops. But the maritime corridor takes full control of navigation signals. The shipping fleets gain the sea lanes. Every vessel dependent on the turbine's positioning network suddenly becomes blind unless they follow the new signals. Min-jae studies her face. And if you don't? Hannah exhales slowly. The turbines collapse one by one. Her gaze drifts toward the dark sky again. Until the maritime corridor controls the grid anyway. Rainwater trickles down the curb toward the storm drain. The silence stretches. The kind of silence that settles only when 2 people understand the same terrible math. Hannah lowers her head slightly. For the first time since he appeared behind her tonight, Min-jae steps forward again. Not close enough to touch. Just close enough that the rain dripping from his coat falls onto the pavement beside her shoes. The steel key glints between them. Then there's one difference, he says quietly. Hannah lifts her eyes. What difference? Min-jae's gaze flicks briefly toward her stomach before returning to her face. If you shut the turbines down, he pauses. The rain hammers harder against the canopy. The people running those fleets will know exactly who did it. Hannah feels the words settle deep in her chest. Her siblings are still on that southern maintenance corridor. She sees their faces for a moment through the rain and darkness. Hard hats, safety harnesses, laughing across video calls during long shifts at sea. They believe they're repairing clean energy infrastructure, not standing inside the center of a silent war. Another vibration cuts through the air. This time Min-jae opens the message immediately. The glow from the screen reflects across both of their faces. His eyes move across the text once, then stop. Hannah watches the change in his expression instantly. What happened? She asks. Min-jae slowly turns the screen toward her again. The new message is shorter than the others. Maintenance crew evacuated from platform 07. Hannah's chest tightens. Relief hits for half a second. Then her eyes drop to the second line beneath it. Evacuation vessel lost contact. The rain crashes against the pavement around them. Somewhere far beyond the airport lights, the turbines continue shutting down in the storm. And the countdown keeps falling. Evacuation vessel lost contact. The words sit on Kong Min-jae's phone screen, glowing cold against the rain-dark curb outside Incheon International Airport. Hannah Seo stares at them. The letters blur slightly as water drips from her hairline onto her cheek. She doesn't wipe it away. For a moment the rain sounds distant, like the ocean pressing against the hull of a ship. Her siblings are somewhere out there on the Yellow Sea, maintenance harnesses clipped to steel towers rising from black water. A vessel was supposed to pull them off platform 07 minutes ago. Now the vessel is gone from the network. Hannah's fingers curl slowly against the fabric of her gray coat. Min-jae lowers the phone but doesn't put it away. The storm wind slides under the canopy again, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and jet fuel. Hannah speaks quietly. Which vessel? Min-jae glances back at the message. Coastal maintenance tender. Hannah nods faintly. She knows the type. Narrow hull. Satellite guidance locked to the offshore turbine navigation signals. Signals she helped design. Signals currently being hijacked. Her breath catches slightly. If the grid rerouted navigation, she murmurs, that ship would lose positioning. Min-jae's gaze sharpens. Meaning? Hannah lifts her eyes slowly toward the rain-blurred road beyond the terminal. Meaning the sea lanes just went blind. The words land quietly, but the weight of them presses harder than the storm. The turbines rising across the Yellow Sea do more than move electricity. They broadcast guidance signals for cargo ships, service vessels, and patrol craft. Without those signals, the dark sea becomes a maze of invisible corridors. Min-jae's phone vibrates again. He ignores it this time. Hannah's voice lowers further. Those evacuation crews depend on the grid to navigate the platforms. He pauses. Without it, they drift. Rainwater runs along the curb beside her suitcase and spills into the storm drain. The sound echoes hollowly. Min-jae studies her face carefully. Hannah's shoulders remain still, but the tension in her hands tightens. Your siblings were stationed in that sector, he says quietly. Hannah doesn't answer. She doesn't have to. The silence says enough. Another turbine failure notification flashes across Min-jae's screen. He glances down briefly. Platform 14 offline. Hannah's head lifts immediately. The southern chain is collapsing faster now. Each lost turbine forces the grid to push more power through the remaining ones. Pressure building inside cables buried along the ocean floor. The timer glows again when Min-jae unlocks the device. 32 minutes and 48 seconds. Hannah exhales slowly. 32 minutes. The storm wind rattles a loose metal panel somewhere along the airport wall. The sound echoes like distant thunder. Min-jae watches Hannah carefully. You're thinking about the load balance. She nods once. If 4 turbines drop in the southern corridor, the central cluster absorbs the surge. Her eyes narrow slightly. But if that cluster overloads... She doesn't finish the sentence. Min-jae understands. The entire offshore grid could collapse. Cities along the southern coast plunging into darkness in the middle of a storm. Hannah's hand drifts toward her stomach again. The motion is instinctive. The wind lifts the edge of her coat slightly before letting it fall. Min-jae notices the movement but says nothing. For a moment neither of them speaks. Rain taps steadily against the pavement. Inside the airport terminal, the final passengers from the Vancouver flight have already disappeared. The glass doors remain closed now. The curb lane empty. Just the two of them standing beneath the canopy while a silent system war spreads across the sea. Hannah breaks the silence first. When did the first shutdown happen? Min-jae glances at the message timestamps. 23 minutes ago. Hannah's jaw tightens. Before you showed me the timer. Yes. Her eyes drift briefly to the steel cylinder still resting in his hand. The master override key. She designed it to shut down turbines safely during catastrophic storms. To prevent overloads from tearing cables apart beneath the ocean floor. Tonight someone else is using the same system to steer the collapse deliberately. Hannah whispers the thought without meaning to. They're herding the grid. Min-jae's gaze sharpens. Herding. Hannah nods faintly. Shutting turbines in a pattern that pushes power exactly where they want it. She turns her head slowly toward the dark sky above the airport. Lightning flickers faintly behind the clouds. Toward the maritime corridor. Min-jae absorbs the words. So whoever's controlling this isn't panicking. Hannah shakes her head once. No, her voice drops almost to a breath. They're executing a plan. The rain intensifies briefly, drumming harder against the canopy. Min-jae checks the screen again. Another message arrives. He reads it silently. Hannah watches the shift in his expression again. Not shock this time. Recognition. What? She asks quietly. Min-jae turns the phone toward her. The message reads, Navigation control transferring to external maritime network. Hannah's stomach twists. It's starting sooner than she calculated. The shipping fleets hidden in the sea lanes are already preparing to take the signal grid. Min-jae lowers the phone again. They're ahead of schedule. Hannah nods slowly. The logic pieces together in her mind with terrifying clarity. The evacuation vessel lost contact not because the sea went dark, but because the navigation system changed masters. She looks at Min-jae sharply. Those ships will follow the strongest signal available. Min-jae nods once. Hannah continues. If the maritime corridor activates its own navigation grid, her voice tightens. Every vessel in the sector will automatically switch to it. Min-jae glances toward the dark highway leading away from the airport, including the evacuation tender. Hannah nods once. The realization lands slowly in the air between them. The maintenance vessel didn't vanish. Simply started following a different signal. A signal controlled by whoever now commands the maritime network. The rain softens for a brief moment, turning into mist. Hannah closes her eyes. Her siblings' faces flicker across her memory again. Harness lines, steel ladders, the smell of salt wind across the turbine platforms. When she opens her eyes again, Min-jae is still holding the key, waiting. The timer glows again when he checks the device. 30 minutes and 11 seconds. Hannah studies the steel cylinder for a long moment. Her reflection bends faintly along its polished surface. If she triggers the override now, the turbines stop feeding power immediately. The maritime corridor gains full navigation control across the Yellow Sea. The evacuation vessel, and every ship following the grid, becomes dependent on those signals. But if she does nothing, the turbines collapse one by one until the corridor controls the grid anyway. Either way, the same hands take control. Hannah reaches out slowly. Her fingers hover just above the key. Min-jae's hand remains steady. The rain taps softly against the metal surface. For several seconds neither of them moves. Then Hannah pulls her hand back again. Min-jae watches her closely. Why stop? He asks quietly. Hannah turns her head toward the sea-dark horizon beyond the airport lights. Her voice lowers. Because whoever is steering the turbines, she pauses, already knows I'm here. Min-jae's eyes narrow. Hannah lifts her chin slightly. The first shutdown happened before you found me. Rain slides down her coat sleeve. That means someone triggered the collapse knowing I'd try to stop it. The wind shifts again beneath the canopy. The timer continues falling silently on Min-jae's screen. Hannah looks back at him. They didn't steal the grid, she says quietly. They baited it. Min-jae studies her face. The storm thunder rolls faintly in the distance. And far out across the Yellow Sea, another turbine goes dark. They baited it. Rain slants harder across the curb outside Incheon International Airport, rattling against the canopy like thrown gravel. Kong Min-jae does not move for several seconds. The steel override key rests between his fingers, catching pale reflections from the terminal lights. Hannah Seo watches the road beyond him, but her attention is nowhere near the airport anymore. It is far out across the Yellow Sea, where turbines are shutting down in a pattern that feels too deliberate to be chaos. Min-jae finally speaks. You're saying they expected you to intervene? Hannah nods once. The motion is small but certain. Rainwater runs down the sleeve of her gray coat and drips from her fingertips. The first turbine dropped before you reached me. Her eyes remain fixed on the storm-dark horizon. Someone wanted the collapse to start where I could see it. Min-jae studies her face. The implication settles slowly. They wanted you to stop it. Hannah's lips tighten. No, she finally turns her head back toward him. They wanted me to choose. The wind pushes a sheet of cold rain under the canopy, spraying both of them. The steel key glints between them again. Min-jae's phone vibrates sharply in his hand. He glances down. Another message. Platform 16 offline. Hannah exhales through her nose. The southern chain is almost gone now. The offshore wind corridor outside Busan harbor is collapsing like falling dominoes. The timer on Min-jae's screen flashes again. 27 minutes and 3 seconds, 27 minutes left. Min-jae slips the phone back into his coat but keeps the key visible in his other hand. Hannah notices that. She also notices something else. "You haven't asked who it is," she says quietly. Min-jae's gaze flickers slightly. "The one funding the grid." Rain strikes the pavement harder. The distant highway hums faintly beyond the terminal. "You haven't said his name," he replies. Hannah's jaw tightens. For a moment she doesn't answer. The silence stretches long enough that the rain fills it completely. Finally she says, "Because it doesn't matter anymore." Min-jae tilts his head slightly. Hannah's voice lowers. "If the maritime corridor finishes taking control tonight, the man behind it won't just own the grid." Her eyes drift toward the sea again. "He'll own every vessel moving through the southern routes. Cargo fleets, patrol craft, fishing vessels, maintenance tenders like the one that vanished minutes ago." Min-jae absorbs the weight of that. "The sea lanes," he murmurs. Hannah nods faintly. Another vibration rattles inside his coat. This time he checks immediately. His thumb unlocks the screen. The glow illuminates the rainwater running down his hand. Hannah watches his expression change again. Not surprise. Something colder. "What?" she asks. Min-jae turns the phone toward her slowly. A live grid map now fills the display. Turbine clusters blink red across the offshore network. The southern chain is nearly gone. But Hannah's eyes catch something else. A new set of signals flickering across the screen. Moving signals. Dozens of them. Sliding through the sea lanes south of Busan. Following the same navigation corridor that just replaced the turbine guidance system. Hannah leans closer without thinking. The cold light reflects across her face. "Those aren't cargo vessels," she whispers. Min-jae says nothing. Hannah's eyes track the formation. The ships are moving too precisely. Too evenly spaced. Her stomach tightens. They're fleet escorts. The rain drums harder against the canopy. Min-jae zooms the map slightly with his thumb. The vessels spread across the maritime corridor like a tightening net. Hannah inhales sharply. "He's securing the grid physically." Min-jae nods once. "If the turbines collapse completely, those ships become the only navigation network left." Hannah's hands curl slowly against her coat. "Meaning every vessel in the sector must follow them." Min-jae's voice stays quiet. "Or disappear." The word lingers heavily. The evacuation tender lost contact minutes ago. Now dozens of fleet ships occupy the same corridor. Hannah stares at the glowing screen. Then at the key again. The steel cylinder feels heavier than ever now. "He's not just stealing electricity," she murmurs. "He's taking the sea." Min-jae watches her carefully. The wind rattles a loose sign near the terminal entrance. Somewhere far off, thunder rolls across the clouds above the coast. Hannah's gaze drops to the timer again. 25 minutes and 19 seconds. Her breathing grows slower, more controlled. She knows what the system is doing now. Each turbine shutdown pushes more power toward the central cluster. When the load reaches critical mass, the entire offshore network will reroute automatically into the maritime corridor. At that moment, the navigation grid shifts permanently to the ships already waiting out there. The trap closes. Hannah whispers almost to herself. "He needed the turbines to collapse in sequence." Min-jae nods. "So the system chooses the maritime network by itself." Hannah lifts her head again. Rainwater slides down her cheek. "That way it looks like a system failure." Min-jae studies her face carefully. "Not sabotage." Hannah nods once. Silence settles between them again. The kind that carries weight. Rain tapping the pavement. Distant engines along the highway. The soft hum of airport lights overhead. Hannah looks at the key again. Then at Min-jae. If I trigger the override now, she says quietly, the turbines stop collapsing. Min-jae's eyes narrow slightly. But the maritime corridor still takes the grid. Hannah nods. Yes. Another turbine failure flashes briefly across his phone. The screen pulses red. Platform 18 offline. Hannah's shoulders stiffen slightly. The southern chain is gone. The central turbines will begin absorbing the load now. The storm wind rises again, pushing rain across the empty terminal curb. Min-jae's voice lowers. Your siblings were evacuated from platform 07. Hannah doesn't answer. She already sees the next problem forming. Those ships following the maritime corridor signals are moving toward the same zone. Her hand drifts slowly toward the steel key. Stops halfway. Min-jae does not pull it away. The metal cylinder glows under the canopy lights. Hannah's fingers hover just above it. The rain taps softly against the steel surface. Neither of them speaks. Finally Hannah's hand lowers again without touching it. Min-jae watches her closely. Why? He asks quietly. Hannah lifts her eyes. The storm wind brushes her hair across her cheek. Because if I stop the turbines now, she pauses. Those ships become the only navigation signal in the sea. Min-jae's jaw tightens slightly. Hannah continues, her voice barely louder than the rain. Every vessel, including the evacuation tender, will follow them. The implication settles in the air. Min-jae glances back at the fleet map glowing on his phone. The ships are tightening formation along the corridor. Waiting. He looks back at Hannah slowly. Timer blinks again. 23 minutes and 44 seconds. Hannah stares at the key once more. The steel cylinder catches the airport light like a blade. She exhales quietly. He doesn't want the grid, she says. Min-jae tilts his head slightly. Hannah meets his eyes. He wants the ships. The wind howls briefly across the terminal roof. And somewhere far out in the storm over the Yellow Sea, the central turbine cluster begins to overload. The central turbine cluster begins to overload. The thought lands in Hannah Seo's chest like a physical impact. She sees the layout clearly in her mind. The towers rising in long rows across the dark water outside Busan harbor, blades slicing through the storm wind. The southern chain is already gone. Now every remaining turbine in the central field is swallowing power meant for 21 towers. The system will try to stabilize. It always does. But turbines are not built for mercy. They obey load equations until the metal fails. Rain lashes sideways beneath the canopy outside Incheon International Airport. Kong Min-jae's phone vibrates again. He unlocks it instantly. Hannah watches the glow spread across his face. A red warning pulses on the screen. Central cluster load surge detected. The timer continues its silent descent. 21 minutes and 18 seconds. Min-jae exhales slowly. It's happening. Hannah nods once. She already knows. Her fingers tighten against the fabric of her coat. Wind pushes rain across the pavement, splashing against her shoes. Somewhere inside the terminal a baggage cart clatters over tile before fading away again. The airport continues its quiet rhythm. The storm beyond the city does not. Hannah whispers, almost to herself. The system will divert the surge toward the nearest open corridor. Min-jae lifts his eyes from the screen. The maritime corridor. Hannah nods faintly. Exactly where those ships are waiting. The steel key remains in Min-jae's hand between them. The polished cylinder catches the pale overhead light. Hannah studies it again. The only tool that can stop the turbines instantly. The only tool that would finish the trap. Min-jae lowers the phone slightly. How long before the central cluster fails? Hannah looks back toward the dark sky beyond the terminal road. Lightning flickers faintly far out over the sea. She calculates silently. 10 minutes. Min-jae's jaw tightens. And the timer. Hannah glances down at the screen again. 20 minutes and 41 seconds, her voice lowers. That's when the maritime corridor becomes permanent. Two clocks racing toward the same moment. One mechanical, one electrical, neither forgiving mistakes. Rainwater runs down the back of Hannah's neck. She barely notices it. Her mind is somewhere else now. Inside turbine control rooms and grid diagrams she memorized years ago. If the central cluster collapses under the load, the entire offshore network will reroute automatically. The system will choose the strongest remaining signal path. The ships. The trap closes without anyone touching the override key. Min-jae studies her face carefully. You're seeing another option. Hannah doesn't answer immediately. Instead she steps past him toward the curb. Rain hits her coat harder as she moves closer to the edge of the canopy. The cold air smells faintly of salt carried inland from the sea. She watches the storm clouds gathering above the horizon. Min-jae turns to follow her movement. Hannah! She lifts one hand slightly. Not to stop him. Just to hold the moment. The rain grows louder. The wind presses against her coat, outlining the curve beneath it. Min-jae notices the motion again. He says nothing. Finally Hannah speaks. The system chooses the strongest navigation signal when it collapses. Min-jae nods once. The ships. Hannah shakes her head slowly. Not if something stronger appears. Min-jae's eyes narrow. What stronger signal? Hannah turns back toward him. Rainwater runs down her cheek. Her gaze drifts to the steel key in his hand. The turbines themselves. Min-jae frowns slightly. You said the turbines are failing. Hannah steps closer again beneath the canopy. Yes. Her voice lowers. But if every turbine shuts down simultaneously? Min-jae finishes the thought quietly. The grid loses its routing logic entirely. Hannah nods. Silence falls between them. The rain taps steadily against the metal canopy above their heads. The highway hums faintly in the distance. Min-jae glances down at the key again. Then back at her. You're talking about a full blackout. Hannah nods once. The grid collapses completely. The words settle heavily. Min-jae studies her expression. Hospitals. Ports. Entire cities along the southern coast. Hannah doesn't look away. Yes. The storm wind rattles a loose sign along the terminal wall. The timer flashes again. 19 minutes and 3 seconds. Hannah continues quietly. But if the grid collapses before the maritime corridor locks, she pauses. The ships lose their signal too. Min-jae understands instantly. The navigation network disappears. The fleet waiting in the sea lanes loses control of the system they're trying to capture. The trap breaks. But the cost spreads across the entire coast. Min-jae's voice drops. You'd shut down half of South Korea's electricity. Hannah nods once. The admission sits calmly between them. For the first time tonight Min-jae looks uncertain. The government would trace that override instantly. Hannah doesn't respond. Her gaze drifts back to the dark road again. Rainwater trickles down the curb beside her fallen suitcase. A taxi drives past slowly on the far lane, its headlights smearing across the wet asphalt before disappearing into the storm. The world keeps moving while the decision grows heavier. Min-jae lifts the steel key slightly again. And if you don't do it? Hannah turns her head back toward him. Then the maritime corridor owns the sea. Min-jae watches her for a long moment. His phone vibrates again. He glances down quickly. Another alert flashes. Central Turbine 03 overload warning. Hannah's shoulders stiffen slightly. The central cluster is starting to buckle. Min-jae looks up again. Time just dropped. Hannah checks the timer. 17 minutes and 42 seconds. The storm wind roars briefly across the terminal roof. Hannah's breathing slows. She feels the weight of two futures pressing against each other. Cities dark, or oceans controlled. She reaches toward the steel key again. This time her fingers close around the cold metal cylinder. The touch sends a chill through her palm. Min-jae releases it without resistance. The key now rests in Hannah's hand. Rain taps against the steel surface. For a moment neither of them speaks. Hannah looks down at the cylinder, then back toward the storm-dark horizon beyond the airport. The turbines far out across the yellow sea continue spinning, straining under impossible load. She exhales quietly. "If I do this," she says almost to herself, "there's no undoing it." Min-jae studies her face. The timer continues blinking on his phone. 16 minutes and 58 seconds. Hannah tightens her grip on the key. Then she freezes. Her head lifts slightly. Min-jae notices immediately. "What?" Hannah doesn't answer. She's staring at the phone screen again. A new signal just appeared on the grid map. Not a turbine. Not one of the fleet ships either. Something else. A single vessel drifting directly between the central turbine cluster and the maritime corridor. Its navigation beacon flickers weakly on the map. Hannah's breath catches. The identifier appears beneath the signal. Maintenance tender. Platform 07 sector. The evacuation vessel. It didn't disappear. Still out there. And it's drifting straight into the collapsing grid. The identifier appears beneath the signal. Maintenance tender. Platform 07 sector. Hannah's breath stops halfway through her chest. The steel key tightens inside her hand. Rain hammers the canopy over the airport curb as Kong Min-jae stares down at the glowing map on his phone. The small signal flickers weakly between the central turbine cluster and the tightening ring of ships occupying the maritime corridor south of Busan Harbor. The vessel drifts slowly across the digital grid. Not following the fleet pattern. Not following the turbine guidance either. Just drifting. Hannah steps closer to the screen before she even realizes she's moving. Water slides from the edge of her coat sleeve and splashes onto the pavement. Zoom in. Her voice barely rises above the rain. Min-jae's thumb moves instantly. The map expands. The sea lane becomes clearer. The cluster of fleet escorts tightens along the navigation corridor like a closing gate. And between them, one lonely vessel blinking weakly. The maintenance tender. Hannah's throat tightens. Platform 07. Her mind fills instantly with the faces she last saw on that deck under turbine shadow. Orange helmets, grease-stained jackets, the sound of metal tools against steel railings. Her younger brother laughing while the storm rolled in from the horizon. Her sister arguing with the deck supervisor about finishing one last inspection before evacuation. The memory hits like cold seawater. Hannah forces her eyes back to the screen. The signal flickers again. Still alive. Min-jae exhales quietly. They never made it out. Hannah doesn't answer. The storm wind pushes rain across the pavement in long silver streaks. The timer on the phone continues its silent descent. 15 minutes and 31 seconds. Min-jae glances from the screen to the steel key clenched in Hannah's hand. If the grid collapses now, his words trail off. Hannah finishes the thought without looking away from the map. The navigation network resets. Her voice comes out low and steady. Everything loses guidance. The maintenance tender's signal flickers again. It moves slightly across the grid. Just enough to confirm the engines are still alive. But the movement is wrong. The vessel drifts toward the central turbine cluster instead of away from it. Directly into the rising overload zone. Hannah feels something inside her chest tighten painfully. The turbines out there are no longer stable. When the surge peaks, the towers will vent excess load through electromagnetic discharge across the surrounding water. Any vessel caught inside that ring. Min-jae watches her face carefully. How long? Hannah looks at the timer again. 14 minutes and 58 seconds. Her voice comes out quieter now. Not long enough. Another alert flashes across the phone. Central turbine 04. Rotor speed critical. The storm outside the terminal roars louder as a gust slams rain against the canopy. Somewhere above them a loose metal panel rattles violently before settling again. Hannah's gaze returns to the drifting beacon. The signal pulses faintly on the map like a weak heartbeat. She imagines the scene out there, the deck rocking under heavy waves, navigation screens flickering, radio static filling the bridge. The crew probably believes the storm knocked out the grid. They have no idea the sea lanes around them are closing under someone else's command. Min-jae speaks quietly. If you trigger the blackout, Hannah nods faintly. Every system goes dark. Ships, turbines, corridor. The tender loses guidance too. Min-jae watches the beacon drift closer to the central cluster on the screen. They won't see the turbines until they're on top of them. The rain fills the silence between them. Hannah closes her eyes for one brief second. The steel key presses cold against her palm. When she opens them again, the map is still there. The vessel still drifting. The fleet ships tightening formation along the maritime corridor. Min-jae's voice lowers. If you wait, Hannah doesn't need him to finish. If she waits, the corridor locks permanently. The ships gain control of every navigation route across the southern sea lanes. The tender survives, guided safely by the fleet signals. The trap succeeds. Her hand tightens harder around the key. The metal edge bites faintly into her skin. Timer drops again. 13 minutes and 47 seconds, another turbine warning flashes. Central cluster thermal limit rising. Hannah's eyes flick back to the tender signal. Still drifting. Still alive. The storm wind howls through the airport terminal entrance behind them, carrying the faint smell of wet asphalt and jet fuel. A distant announcement echoes briefly through the building before fading away again. The normal world continues just meters away. Here beneath the canopy, time feels thinner. Min-jae lowers the phone slightly. Hannah. She doesn't look at him. They're still out there. Min-jae nods slowly. His gaze drops to the key in her hand. So are a lot of other people. The words settle heavily in the air. Hannah's chest rises and falls once. She stares at the drifting beacon on the screen. The map shifts slightly as the storm pushes the vessel further toward the turbine ring. The cluster lights on the display begin flashing faster now. Rotor synchronization failure detected. The grid is starting to fracture. Hannah's fingers tremble faintly around the steel key. She forces them still. For a moment the only sound is the rain and the low hum of airport lights overhead. Then she steps closer to Min-jae again. Her eyes lock onto the timer. 12 minutes and 21 seconds. She whispers something under her breath. Too quiet for Min-jae to hear. Then she lifts her hand. The steel key catches the pale airport light. Min-jae watches her carefully. You're choosing. Hannah doesn't answer. Her gaze stays on the drifting vessel. The maintenance tender flickers once more on the screen. Then suddenly the signal jumps, just slightly. Min-jae notices first. His eyes narrow. They changed course. Hannah leans closer instantly. The vessel's path has shifted a few degrees east, directly toward the fleet corridor, toward the waiting ships. The corridor signals are pulling it in. Hannah's breath catches. If the tender enters that corridor, the fleet escorts will take control of its navigation immediately. And once the maritime corridor locks, those ships will own every vessel in the sector, including the one carrying her family. Min-jae's voice tightens. They're already being captured. Hannah's hand rises higher. The steel key trembles once in the stormlight. Timer drops again. 11 minutes and 46 seconds. She looks at the beacon one last time. Then she turns the key slowly toward Min-jae. And the turbines across the Yellow Sea begin screaming under the rising load. The steel key trembles once in Hannah Seo's hand. Rain hits the canopy so hard the sound becomes almost solid. Kong Min-jae does not reach for the key she's holding out to him. He watches her instead. Watches the small shift in her wrist, the way her fingers tighten and loosen again around the cold metal cylinder. The glow of his phone screen spills across both their hands. The grid map is still open. The maintenance tender from Platform 07 continues drifting toward the tightening corridor of ships south of Busan Harbor. The vessel's beacon flickers weakly. Live. Moving. But the course is no longer its own. The corridor signals are already pulling it. Hannah's arm remains extended between them. The steel key rests in her open palm now. Rainwater slides down her sleeve and runs across the metal surface. "Take it," she says quietly. Min-jae doesn't move. His gaze flicks from the key to the screen again. The timer pulses in the corner. 10 minutes and 54 seconds, another alert flashes red across the display. Central turbine 05 rotor imbalance far out across the yellow sea. The turbine cluster is losing synchronization. The storm wind drives the blades faster while the surge forces power through circuits designed for half the load. The machines are beginning to scream. Hannah hears that sound in her memory even from here. The low mechanical howl turbines make when the wind outruns their control systems. Min-jae finally speaks. "If you give me that key," his voice trails off. Hannah finishes the sentence without looking at him. "Then you'll decide." He nods faintly. The rain grows heavier. Cars pass slowly through the airport drop-off lane behind them, tires hissing across wet pavement. None of the drivers notice the quiet crisis unfolding under the terminal canopy. Min-jae looks at the drifting vessel again. The beacon slides closer to the maritime corridor line on the map. The fleet ships remain locked in their formation like teeth along a steel trap. If the tender crosses that line, the fleet's guidance system will take control of it instantly. Min-jae's eyes lift back to Hannah. "They'll survive if the corridor locks." Hannah nods once. "Yes." The word sits heavy between them. The maintenance tender survives. Her brother. Her sister. The rest of the crew. But the corridor becomes permanent. Every vessel passing through the southern sea routes falls under the same network that already controls the fleet escorts. A system no civilian authority can override once it stabilizes. Min-jae studies her face carefully. "And if you use the key?" Hannah's voice drops to a whisper. Everything goes dark. Turbines, the ships, corridor. The sea itself becomes blind. Navigation systems across the coast fail instantly. The tender loses guidance along with everyone else. Min-jae glances back to the timer. 9 minutes and 41 seconds. The grid warnings multiply across the screen. Central cluster voltage surge rotor lock failure. The storm wind outside roars across the terminal roof like distant surf. Hannah's hand lowers slightly. The key tilts downward. For a moment neither of them speaks. Rainwater drips from the edge of the canopy onto the pavement below in steady taps. Min-jae exhales slowly. "You're asking me to choose for you." Hannah shakes her head once. "No," her eyes lift to meet his. "I'm asking you to stop me." The words land quietly between them. Min-jae's gaze shifts to the drifting vessel again. The tender moves another small distance toward the corridor line. The beacon flickers stronger now as the fleet signals begin overriding the damaged turbine guidance grid. The ship is being pulled like a needle toward a magnet. The timer drops again. 8 minutes and 56 seconds. Min-jae looks back at Hannah. The rain running down her hair. The exhaustion in her shoulders. The steel key trembling faintly between her fingers. "You already know what you're going to do," he says softly. Hannah doesn't respond. Her eyes stay on the map. The tender's beacon moves another fraction closer to the corridor boundary. The fleet ships tighten their formation. The storm outside the airport deepens, thunder rumbling somewhere over the distant coast. Another turbine alert flashes across the phone. Central cluster overload threshold approaching. The surge is nearly at its peak. If the turbines break first, the system will reroute automatically. No key needed. The corridor locks permanently. Min-jae notices Hannah's grip tightening again around the metal cylinder. Her breathing slows. Something inside her is settling. The decision space is closing. Timer blinks. 8 minutes and 12 seconds. Hannah finally lowers her arm. The key remains in her hand. She looks at Min-jae again, but this time her gaze is steadier. If the blackout happens before the corridor locks, Min-jae nods faintly. The trap fails. Hannah glances back at the phone. The tender's beacon inches closer to the corridor line. Another few seconds and the fleet system will claim it. The rain grows louder again. A strong gust pushes water beneath the canopy and across Hannah's shoes. She barely notices. Her attention is fixed entirely on that tiny blinking signal on the screen. The beacon pauses for a moment, just outside the corridor boundary. Then it moves again. One slow drift forward. Min-jae's jaw tightens. They're almost inside. Hannah's fingers close fully around the steel key. The metal disappears into her fist. Timer drops again. 7 minutes and 34 seconds. Silence settles between them for a long moment. Only rain. Only wind. Only the quiet glow of the grid map. Then Hannah moves. Not toward Min-jae. Toward the small security console mounted against the terminal pillar beside them. The panel that controls emergency network access for airport infrastructure. Min-jae watches her step toward it. His eyes widen slightly. Hannah! She doesn't stop. The steel key glints once under the canopy lights as she lifts her hand toward the console port. Min-jae's phone vibrates violently again. He glances down instinctively. A new message flashes across the screen. Maritime corridor lock sequence initiated. The timer collapses suddenly. 3 minutes. Min-jae's head snaps back up. Hannah has already aligned the steel key with the override slot. The metal edge touches the console port. And far out across the storm-dark water beyond Busan Harbor, the central turbine cluster finally begins to tear itself apart. The steel key turns. The motion is small. Barely more than a click inside the emergency console beside the terminal pillar at Incheon International Airport. Hannah Seo keeps her hand on it even after the mechanism locks into place. For a moment nothing happens. Rain still pours beyond the canopy. Taxi lights smear across the wet pavement. Kong Min-jae's phone screen remains frozen between them, the grid map glowing faintly in the storm-dark air. Then the display flickers. The turbines vanish from the map first. The bright red warnings blink out one by one until the central cluster disappears completely. The navigation lines collapse next. The neat corridor of signals stretching south of Busan Harbor breaks apart like a snapped wire. The fleet escorts, dozens of moving icons, lose their formation instantly. Their routes dissolve into scattered motion across the empty sea. The maintenance tender's beacon remains. A single blinking point, drifting in darkness where the network used to be. Min-jae exhales slowly. The phone screen dims as the system loses its last external signal. The map goes black. The rain keeps falling. Hannah's hand slides away from the console. The steel key remains lodged in the port. Cold metal against cold metal. The airport lights hum softly overhead, still powered by the city's internal grid. But far beyond the coast the sea is blind now. Wind pushes another sheet of rain beneath the canopy. It spatters against Hannah's coat and runs down the front of the gray fabric. She doesn't move to wipe it away. Min-jae lowers his phone. The blank screen reflects the two of them faintly. For several seconds neither of them speaks. The storm wind rolls through the drop-off lane again, rattling the plastic arrival signs above the curb. Somewhere inside the terminal a suitcase will clicks over tile, then fades into distance. The ordinary world moves on. Hannah finally lifts her head toward the road. Headlights slide past through the rain. The wet pavement reflects them in long broken streaks. Her suitcase still lies tipped on its side where she dropped it earlier. One wheel spins slowly from the wind. Min-jae watches her profile. The tension that held her shoulders rigid minutes ago has shifted. Not gone. Just heavier. He glances once toward the console where the steel key remains embedded. The blackout is already spreading along the coast. Cities dimming. Harbors pausing. The sea lanes silent. No alarms sound here at the airport. No announcement interrupts the rain. Hannah steps forward and sets the suitcase upright again. The plastic handle clicks softly as she pulls it up. The small action seems louder than it should. She lets the suitcase rest beside her leg without rolling it. Min-jae studies her face carefully. The rain dampens the loose strands of her hair. Her eyes drift toward the empty sky beyond the terminal road. Somewhere far beyond that horizon, ships are navigating blind water. Somewhere beyond that, a maintenance tender floats between turbines that have gone still. The silence stretches. Finally Min-jae looks down at his phone again. The screen remains dark except for a single faint icon blinking at the edge of signal range. He taps it once. The weak beacon appears again. The maintenance tender. Still alive. Still drifting. Without a network, without guidance. Just a point in the dark sea. Min-jae lowers the phone again without saying anything. Hannah's gaze remains fixed on the rain-soaked road ahead. Her hand rests lightly on the suitcase handle now. The steel key glints faintly behind her inside the console port. Wind moves through the terminal entrance again, carrying the smell of wet concrete and distant jet fuel. The storm clouds beyond the airport glow faintly with lightning somewhere far over the coast. Hannah shifts her weight slightly. The suitcase wheels roll an inch across the pavement before stopping again. Min-jae watches her. For a moment his eyes drift toward the terminal doors behind them. Bright glass, warm interior light, people passing inside unaware of the dark sea beyond the horizon. Then he looks back at Hannah. She doesn't turn around. The rain softens slightly. Traffic along the airport road slows to a thin trickle of passing headlights. A taxi pulls briefly into the curb lane, hesitates, then drives on when no passenger approaches. Hannah remains where she is. The storm light reflects faintly across the wet pavement around her shoes. Her hand tightens once on the suitcase handle, then loosens again. Min-jae glances once more at the black phone screen. The faint beacon from the tender blinks slowly. A weak pulse. Then another. He pockets the phone without a word. The canopy lights flicker slightly as another gust passes over the roof. The suitcase wheel spins once in the wind again. Hannah finally lifts her eyes toward the road stretching away from the terminal. Rain gathers along the edge of her jaw before dropping quietly onto the pavement. She doesn't reach for the console behind her. She doesn't look back at the steel key still locked inside it. She just stands there beneath the airport lights, one hand on the suitcase handle, while the storm moves slowly over the coast and the dark sea beyond Busan Harbor waits in silence.